that maybe Trump is in there and that maybe there's some damaging information about him.
I think it's just kind of a byproduct of the digital age. I don't think it's necessarily partisan.
When you engage in economic growth, when you actually have substantial growth, a lot of the spending increases as well.
Bad policy, it's bad politics, it's bad for America in the long run.
Welcome to Our National Conversation, a podcast in which we discuss politics from all angles. We are completely nonpartisan, and all views, respectfully stated, are welcome here. Our podcast is unique in that it is hosted and run by students who are focused on finding solutions to the biggest problems facing America.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Our National Conversation. The date today is June 7th, and my name is Sam Taylor. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Our National Conversation, also second as the frequent host for this podcast, where we dive into alternative perspectives. Now, today we're going to be discussing something a little funny. At least I think it's kind of funny, the fallout and sort of feud between Musk and Trump. Some people are calling this the first breakup of Pride Month. Lots of memes being thrown around. And then a little later in the conversation, we might get into more of the sort of substance here. What instigated this? What are the policy implications? Different things like that. So I'm joined today by two guests. Connor, who is the Director of Policy Content and Strategy here at ONC, and Jeff, who is our CEO. Both of them are fairly frequent guests on the podcast as well. So, guys, what's your general reaction to this fallout?
Well, I think the last few months have been very tense politically, whatever side of the aisle you sit on. It's been a lot of tension and DOGE jumping in there and carving up the government and everyday new immigration things, the tariffs, just every day it's something new. It's hard to keep up with it all. So when this dispute ripped open the other day, it actually seemed funny to me. I think it was comic relief that maybe some of us or a lot of us needed. During the day with the Twitter war going back and forth, I just found myself laughing. And I know it's not really funny. It's probably really bad for the country that this is happening at all, but they seem like two little kids in the playground. And as one of the female commentators put it the other night, I think it was on CNN, this would never happen if women were running the government. This looked like, two alpha males who had huge egos, and they just, it was inevitable that at some point this was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it is. It's, you bring up kind of the dichotomy of the situation. It's on the one hand, it's really immature and just funny in that sense. But then on the other, you got to think, well, these are the two people who are probably, depending on what measure you adopt, the most powerful men in the country, and by extension, maybe some of the most powerful people in the world. And they're acting in this way. It's maybe a little concerning there. Connor, I don't know. Do you have a different reaction to the situation, or are you pretty on board there?
I think it's quite embarrassing, actually. Part of the MAGA movement that I really like is the fact that they do distance themselves from this sort of elitist statesman-like rhetoric that the political ruling class is often known for, or has become known for over the decades in the Western world. And I think a lot of people, especially the working class, everyday folk, enjoy that candidness. But I mean, this is just crossing the line. I think that it's extremely petty, especially coming from Musk. I hate to take sides in this, and I don't really want to, because it feels like celebrity drama, and I dislike that sort of stuff. But I really think this was kind of brought on by Musk, and his past behaviors have shown to be very erratic and almost bipolar. Not just, it's people say, oh, well, Trump is unpredictable as well, but that's different. Trump is a stable person, or at least that's my opinion. You can count on the fact that he might be egotistical, and he might turn around and say something kind of brash. You can count on that, but when you compare that to the behavior of Musk in the past, it's like apples and oranges. It's hard to compare the two, and I'm really at a loss for words here. I mean, sheesh, it's really been back and forth. Trump is accused Musk of, being doped up all the time, essentially on a cocktail of drugs, perhaps from his doctor. I think ketamine was the accusation. This isn't the first time that these sorts of accusations have been thrown his way. Years and years ago, before he ever bought Twitter or anything, he had been accused of late night Ambien induced tweeting frenzies, where he goes on these impulsive rants and starts impulsively posting on Twitter. But I guess to sum it up, I think this is really splitting the conservative base. It's damaging the conservative movement at a time where we're only 6 months into this administration. We need unity, not a fracturing of Team Musk versus Team Trump. It's only going to hurt America and the goals that this administration has set for their itinerary over the next 4 years.
Yeah. Well, thank you for painting that picture there, Connor, because as maybe, you've been frequent guests on the podcast, so I kind of have, I guess, somewhere between a moderate and maybe a more progressive outlook. So when I look at this initially, I'm just thinking, gosh, this is very unprofessional, immature, but it's just funny in that sense, and as Jeff said, maybe this is the comic relief we needed, but you've presented something that's a little more of a, I don't know, like a kind of dire outlook just for the conservative movement and the unity of that, that base here. And maybe that is it's kind of a major problem coming from that perspective. You mentioned really briefly, I just want to dig into this a little more to really understand what you're referring to. You mentioned kind of a pattern of behavior on Musk's part, and you mentioned some of these tweet rants, impulsive tweeting, and so forth. Is there anything in particular, at least in recent times, that you can point to? Because I think to a lot of people, this just seems kind of out of left field, and we can talk about what instigated it, but it didn't seem to me like there was a pattern of this sort of thing, and then all of a sudden there's this great divide, and it seems that a lot of people were caught off guard. So what are you kind of talking about when you say the pattern of behavior there? Maybe this isn't as surprising as some people claim it is, that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, certainly it is out of left field. This bombshell that he dropped of, this is ridiculous that, Trump is named in the Epstein files. And that's what started it all, this massive tweet that was just on the front page of X with tens of millions of views, claiming that Donald Trump was in the Epstein files. And that's why they haven't been released to the public, because he's trying to shield himself for political reasons, obviously, which I think is the biggest crock of, a whole lot of nothing, given the fact that, let's be honest here. If that was the case, then the Democrats would have dug that up and used it and weaponized it against him a long time ago during the Biden administration. So I think this is really just kind of desperation from Elon Musk. Obviously, he didn't like what was in the bill. He's his DOGE department, which, I am grateful for that. I think it was much needed. But he was obviously against raising the debt ceiling, and he felt that it was, essentially erasing all of the hard work that DOGE did and just putting America on a path, a quicker path towards bankruptcy, which I do agree with, but I don't agree with this, petty public divorce and the way he's doing it. And as far as, I guess behavioral patterns of Musk, he hasn't come out and really, disagreed with Trump or tried to bury him in the media like he has before. But there have been a lot of things. I spent a lot of time on X for news and stuff, so I have seen a lot of his takes where, I wake up and I look at the front page and there it is. And I'm like, wow, okay. Obviously you can say this because you're not a politician. But essentially he's become like a quasi politician, the way he positions himself and, how often this guy's seen in the Oval Office next to Trump or next to important cabinet members at meetings with, top level diplomats or heads of state of other countries. It's almost like he's trying to position himself as this sort of magistrate or, very powerful, I don't want to say court jester, but somebody who is, it really feels like he's eyeing political power. to maybe to further his own vision for righteous vision for America, whatever that may be. But there have certainly been many times where I've witnessed some of his takes that are just very. I guess the only way I could put it is, this is he's saying a lot of the things that maybe everyday folks would say on Twitter, that aren't exactly politically correct, or might be kind of stoking polarization and stuff like that. But I think he gets away with it because he is, because he's one of the richest men in the world, and it's just so all over the place. It's if you have a history of following him, you'll probably know what I'm referencing here. But yeah, it's a different sort of behavior from Trump's erraticism.
Jeff, you look like you want to say something.
I do. First of all, let's go back to Epstein. I think that Musk would not make an accusation like that unless he had a really good reason for doing it. Because if it turns out there's nothing there, that's the end of Musk. He'll have zero credibility after that. Let's face it, he and his guys have been tapping into databases all throughout the government for several months now. Nobody really knows what they're up to or what they're finding. My instinct tells me they have found something. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said this. Now, what's in there? We don't know. But we all know that the Republicans for a very long time have wanted those files released. They're looking for dirt on Bill Clinton and other Democrats. And, they want to spill the beans in the worst possible way. And they were having all kinds of investigations and this and that. Why hasn't the Trump administration released this file? What are they sitting on and why? So that to me gives a little credence to the possibility. I'm not saying the reality, but the possibility that maybe Trump is in there and then maybe there's some damaging information about him.
Yeah. Well, I think we kind of a few thoughts on this. I think first of all, just being in the Epstein files alone, I've seen a few people make this point, that's not necessarily a massive bombshell, because that could just mean, there was some sort of business relationship or there was some tie there, but that doesn't necessarily mean, he was on the island or whatever else. And, obviously Epstein had tons of ties to a lot of very, very rich and famous people. So, but, you make a good point there, Jeff. There's the possibility there's something in there more. And maybe some top Democrats didn't want this released because it's, there's information on some of their people. Maybe Trump doesn't want to release either because there's some, bad stuff that goes back to him. It's a possibility worth considering. But, I don't know if I would say that it's the possibility that I lean towards, and I'll tell you why. I think that in our age today, someone like Musk or someone like Trump or a lot of other people, they can say something that is mostly just air. It's just meant to stoke a reaction. There's really not a lot of substance behind it. And then, with how our media cycle works, like year or two later, it's not really treated with a lot of significance. I mean, Trump says things that are completely false all the time, but he kind of gets away with it because you just expect that from him, right? And his base doesn't really care that much. They either enjoy it or they're focused more on the policy or whatever else. I think that's just part of the media personality at this landscape that's infused with tons of misinformation and disinformation, that it's sort of like, oh, he said that and now we move on. And I don't know that it would ruin him per se. So while I think that you're bringing up a good possibility, something that we need to keep in mind here, yeah, I don't know if I would say it seems most plausible to me.
Well, I would agree that even if he's in there, I don't think Trump's base will care. He's gotten away with so much for so long. I mean, starting with those tapes where, he talked about grabbing women by the you-know-what, it just seems to roll off his shoulders and nobody seems to care too much about it. Democrats don't feel that way. They're very upset about these things, but I think they've learned to live with it because there's just no stopping Trump when it comes to these things.
And even if kind of another point I was making there. Even if what Musk is saying just isn't true or isn't relevant, like even if Trump isn't in there in any significant way, I think the flip side of that is that might not hurt Musk very much at all because it's a sort of a similar situation to Trump. He says things and some of those things just flat out aren't true, but we kind of move on and people enjoy him for other reasons.
Well, Musk says things too. Let's face it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's part of the problem of our era. It's hard to keep it all straight. You start questioning your own sanity after a while trying to keep up with all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Connor, I don't know. Do you have any reactions to that? Just as we've noted before, as someone who is kind of more within the MAGA base, in some fashion or another. Just I don't know. Kind of, what's your reaction to this? I guess what I'm really curious about is just the sort of misinformation, disinformation, and whatever else that's just so normalized to the point where we can say, you know what, even if Musk is saying something that's really not true at all or not relevant, he'll probably get away with it. Same thing with Trump. I mean, that's just sort of on the daily. Like, I'm just kind of curious. What's your reaction to this sort of atmosphere that's been cultivated?
I mean, I take a lot of things with the grain of salt. I think there's an element, a kernel of truth in everything. So for every, tweet that's espousing X, Y, or Z from Musk, or from Trump for that matter, I think usually I'm able to discern. I look at that and say, okay, well, I think this is a problem, but maybe not to this degree, or maybe the solution does need to be employed, but maybe the scale is being blown out of proportion a little bit. I think it's just kind of a byproduct of the digital age. I don't think it's necessarily partisan, really. But I do want to say that if I found out that Donald Trump was a child predator, I mean, that would immediately tank my support for him to zero. As would be the case for any politician or major political figure out there. I do think that would heavily damage his reputation. I'm sure there would be some who would probably support him, not because they're on board with supporting a child predator, but they would cope by essentially claiming that it's fake news. But that would definitely shake my faith for sure. But I mean, really,
I think even if some report is issued by the Department of Justice or whoever is investigating this, I think if there's anything in there on Trump, they will redact that before it ever sees the light of day.
Yeah, that just makes it even more. That just harms his cause even more, I think.
But how would you know? How would you know? They're not going to tell you that they excised, 22 paragraphs.
Well, recently they released the JFK files, and there was a bunch of stuff in there that was clearly redacted. It said redacted, and it was whited out. Yeah. And so people got to read through, dozens and dozens of pages of these now declassified documents, decades and decades later. But there was just lines that were whited out, and it said redacted. So I don't know if it would be something similar to that, but I think that. Look, I mean, Sam, you're right. Epstein was in contact with pretty much anybody who was wealthy and influential at the time. So just because you're associated with Epstein at some point doesn't mean that you're guilty of flying to his island. And, I think this was released in the first round of the Epstein files that came out in, I think, January, February. But, it's known that Trump flew on Epstein's private jet at least 7 times, but it doesn't say. I don't think it's known whether that jet was flying to a private island. I mean, he's a wealthy financier. I'm sure he had plenty of flights to Brussels or Davos, wherever for the day for business meetings with Donald Trump or Prince Andrew, whoever it was. Maybe some of them are guilty, some of them are not, but I don't think that's necessarily an indictment. But I do tend to lean towards what you're saying on this, Sam, that This is really just Musk kind of, pumping this balloon full of hot air. You're right. I mean, him and Trump say a lot of stuff that people just kind of raise their eyebrows at and say, wow. And then a couple days later, something else moves, the media news cycle moves on and it's old news. But I think it's a tantrum. The way I look at it, it's a tantrum, and he has a tendency to kind of, like I said, to act impulsively, almost like a child sometimes. And I was watching, I think it was a Frontline documentary on Musk and interviewing past employees of his and business associates, and this was like a recurring theme for him is that very, very incredibly intelligent guy, but also very childlike in a lot of ways, almost like when he doesn't get what he wants, he kind of throws his toys on the ground and screams and cries and engages in manipulation and all this stuff. So that he's got this sort of known complex that's going on, even if it was on a smaller scale with past business associates or employees. But I think that for whatever reason, he's a wealthy man and he had perhaps a conflict of interest. And he didn't like the way this might have gone for his business ventures, and now he's trying to shake Trump out and trying to affect change and get his way that way.
The way you describe Trump throwing tantrums when he doesn't get his way sounded very much like the way somebody might describe Donald Trump as well. Maybe they're just too similar, and therefore the clash was inevitable. Let me say something nice about Elon Musk. Trump needed a guy like that to go in there and do the DOGE thing. If you relied on Congress to take it upon themselves to, cut costs and hack away at programs, it never would have happened. They would have talked it to death for years and years. They would have resisted because all of these congressmen, either Democrats or Republicans, they have all of their pet projects and agendas that they want to protect. So I think you needed some kind of blunt force trauma to shake things up. Now, having said that, I think the blunt force trauma was too blunt, too forceful, too traumatic. I think Musk looked like he was almost taking personal glee with his chainsaw and chopping away at things. I think there could have been a better process. I'm an action guy. I come from an entrepreneurial background, so I don't like the idea of bureaucracy and red tape and too much conversation. But I think what they should have done is they should have said to all of the department heads, the cabinet leaders, hey, look, the government is bloated. We need to trim. We're going to cut back by 10% or 15% or 20%, whatever the magic number is. And then they should have given the cabinet heads, 2 months to figure it out. You work through your own bureaucracy. You come back and tell us who you're going to cut, what you're going to cut, and how you're going to do it. And I think it could have been a much better handled situation. I think this was bad management. That's how I view it. Good.
Yeah, so let's maybe transition and get into that a little more because, Jeff, you make some good points there. But I also think that, one thing we have to keep in mind about what DOGE did is at the end of the day, when we're talking about the whole federal deficit, all the cuts that were made, and Musk and his team are claiming it was somewhere around 180 billion, which isn't a verified number, but we can just, for the sake of argument, we'll take them at their word, say that's what we cut. But when we compare it to just the whole, government bureaucracy, the spending, et cetera, it's kind of just a drop there. And at the end of the day, if we want to make truly massive changes and maybe truly address the deficit, that kind of has to occur through Congress in some way or another. So I think, maybe if we get a little bit into this new bill, the big, beautiful bill, I'm curious what you guys have been hearing about it. And also if you want to talk more about DOGE and the management and so forth, I think it's a very valuable conversation. But it just seems to me that at the end of the day, Congress kind of has to take a big role in this if we're going to make some pretty big changes. And there seems to be a pretty big partisan divide, at least in Congress, over whether this bill is actually a step in the right direction or the exact opposite, with a number of Republicans and prominent conservative thinkers also arguing that it's the opposite, probably most notably Musk himself. So just what have you been hearing on this? What are your thoughts?
Firstly, you know, I have a tweet pulled up here from Congressman Thomas Massey, who, this is in reference to the big beautiful bill here. I'm just going to read it out really quick. He says the House has a 72-hour rule which requires the bill to be posted 72 hours before passage, but the Speaker circumvented this rule with a manager's amendment, quote, that rewrote and added substantial portions of the bill as it went through the Rules Committee the night the bill was passed. There's another House rule which requires a day to pass before voting on a bill after the Rules Committee has modified it. Would you believe the House voted to suspend that so-called same-day rule? This means the final language of the bill was released only a few minutes before debate began. The vote on the rule change, the vote on the rule change, and the vote on the bill followed within a couple of hours. Elon is right. Members of Congress didn't even know what was in this bill until the night it passed. A few other members have also made this clear. So I think that's, that's definitely an interesting point to touch on. I see why Musk is upset about that. It brings into question, the transparency of our government, and why are they sneaking in changes like this, right before we cross the finish line. Maybe because it'll be obstructed, right? And that it'll be subject to gridlock, and they just know that this is the only way. We have to raise the debt ceiling to keep the government running and to keep social programs running and all sorts of other expenditures, and there's just no other way around it. So we just need to get this through, and we'll suffer the consequences later.
Or they know that by revealing their hand and discussing openly and in a transparent way and giving people time to think about this, that people will have the opportunity to object to the bill with some legitimacy. I mean, there's probably a lot of stuff in there that both sides don't like, but to ram it through in the middle of the night without any opportunity to read it and review it and think about it and talk about it, again, I think it's just bad management. I think it just undercuts the authority of Congress, really. They should be taking responsibility for this stuff, but they're not. They're just kowtowing to Trump and giving him everything he wants.
Yeah. No, and it seems like this is a charge that's levied against Congress quite a bit, or like this whole process of we're gonna get this like massive bill, thousands of pages, make tons of changes beforehand. They're gonna vote on it without really knowing what's in there, and then consequences follow. I've seen this critique levied, on the right. A lot of people argued, well, this is an instance of massive bloat. The government bureaucracy, nothing really working as it's supposed to. But obviously it's also occurring, when we kind of have, Trump in power, and this seems to be kind of his big bill here. Something he's talked about for a long time. If you go through the table of contents, there's a lot of sections on his talking points there. So I don't know, Connor, maybe what's your reaction to that perspective? I've kind of said there that Jeff's elaborated on, that that this maybe the responsibility for what's occurring here lies more with Trump and his people, or do you think that there's something else going on here? Like I don't know, just is there something that we can attribute responsibility to this this process of kind of subverting the House's authority, if that is what has occurred here, or is it too early to tell? Is it just the Rules Committee?
The House is happy to go along with this because they don't want to take responsibility for this. If they can say, well, this is Trump's bill, or, Elon Musk made us do this, or whatever subterfuge they're going to take, then they don't have to take the hard votes. They can just do it in the middle of the night when nobody's looking and hope that nobody cares the next day.
Got it. Yeah. So the responsibility lies with the House for subverting its own responsibility, because they don't want to take the heat or break with party line or whatever else.
They've abdicated, it looks like to me.
Is that what you're seeing, Connor?
It could be, yeah. That is exactly that. That's another perspective, that they don't want to take the heat, and they say, okay, well, I don't want this. I don't want this coming back on me. So let's just kind of get it through real quick, and hopefully it goes under the radar. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I mean, Trump is pretty set on this bill, and his cabinet, his people, his top people are set on this, and they wanted it passed, and so he passed it. I mean, also, I think this is Trump's second term, so we're already 6 months in. We have another 3.5 years to go, so I think maybe he's trying to use the time that he has left wisely to expedite his agenda and get things through very quickly, so that they can kind of check that off and move on to move down the list onto this itinerary of probably a long list of other things that he wants to get done, and that the administration wants to see happen. So I don't know. It could likely be bits and pieces of all of these.
Yes, let's talk.
It seems to me that
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
it seems to me the Trump team is moving on all fronts. It's not just the big, beautiful bill. I mean, in a normal political situation, you would think that they would sequence things a bit. Let's worry about immigration first, then we'll balance the budget, then we'll talk about, political reform or whatever they want to talk about. But they're flooding the zone, and they're hammering away on everything. And if there's any wokeness out there, it's under attack. Academia feels under attack. The media feels under attack. Everybody's feeling under attack if you're not, a true MAGA person. And it's hard to keep up with it all. So I don't know what the agenda is for Trump post big, beautiful bill, because it seems like he's already acting on all the different aspects of it.
Maybe this sort of mentality of get absolutely everything you can, done before midterm elections. When it just might not be nearly as feasible.
Right.
Sam, I do want to say one thing really quick before we move on. And that's this, I think it should be noted that, in American economics and the history of our country, we're not known for austerity measures when it comes to the economy. The Europeans are certainly known for that in the wake of, the financial crisis, and at other times where they...
Connor, just really quickly, for anyone who
Sam.
might not know, do you want to define austerity measure? Sort of, attempts to balance the budget, reduce deficits, that sort of thing. That's what we're referring to, right?
Yeah, fiscal austerity. Sure. Yeah, fiscal austerity measures are just, exactly that. Attempts to balance the budget, really cut spending and place limiters on government spending in order to balance the budget. So, I mean, that it's a double-edged sword. For the Europeans, it did reduce spending in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, and it did help balance the budgets. But a lot of American-style economists argue that it really hurt the European economy, and the European economy didn't grow to the same extent that the American economy grew and recovered in the wake of that crisis, because we took the opposite approach. We decided that to essentially spend our way out of it and stimulate our economy. And a lot of people, especially Americans, argue that was the right decision. So it's just something that we're known for here in America. We're not known for fiscal austerity, really. So reflecting back on it now, it actually doesn't surprise me that this bill is being passed and that we are raising the debt ceiling again. When have we not raised the debt ceiling? When have we ever advocated for fiscal austerity and cutting Social Security and cutting Medicaid and kind of just willingly accepting a really, really slow or worse, a stagnant economy for the next decade, where GDP is down and America isn't doing so well, but that at the end of that decade, maybe our books are a little more balanced. It's just not our style.
This remains to be seen. I'm actually kind of a fiscal hawk, to be honest with you. The debt scares the hell out of me. I think we have been in denial for decades. Nobody seems to care. I just have a feeling we're going to turn into Greece one day, and then the next day the IMF and all these other institutions will turn on us, and this will be a wonderful opportunity for China to lead the world economy through its currency or some other structures. The Americans are giving up their leadership here, it seems to me, through the deficit spending. And everybody knows we have a problem, just nobody wants to deal with it. It's just mind-boggling to me. And if you look at the DOGE activities, and if you look at the big, beautiful bill, they really haven't done anything to tighten up at the Pentagon. And I have to believe there's some waste, fraud, and abuse there, or maybe overspending on whatever. There's very little talk about a meaningful tax increase. And I know this is a typical Republican posture to take, but we're going to have a tax increase at some point. How we pull it off exactly, the experts can talk about, but we're just avoiding reality here, it seems to me.
Well, this bill is full of tax cuts, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I was looking at it, and it seems that most of essentially how you treat the bill's impact on the deficit really comes down to whether you include the tax cuts kind of in the figure. If you include those cuts, at least based on what I was reading, this is mainly derived from a segment on PBS where they kind of go into the economics of this. But so essentially, you have these massive tax cuts. They're extensions from Trump's general tax approach there, and if you keep them in place, then what this bill is doing is it's raising the deficit significantly. If you ignore the tax cuts, then through reductions in other forms of government spending and so forth, where we're actually quote unquote reducing the deficit. And it seems to me what a lot of Republicans have been saying is, because the tax cuts are just extensions, they're not really new, or at least they're extensions for the most part. We really shouldn't include them in the analysis here. So really what we're doing is we're reducing the deficit. But I mean, at the end of the day, regardless of what you do or don't include in the bill's effects, the fact of the matter remains those tax cuts still exist, right? That's money that the government isn't taking in. That's, essentially to be treated as a cost, sort of another instance of spending, depending on exactly how you frame it there. And, that's raising the deficit there. So I think the other main argument is that, well, these tax cuts are going to, help stimulate the economy, and that's going to help us kind of reduce the deficit, overall. It's going to put the government in a better fiscal situation. We'll go from there. But it also seems, based on what I've read, that when you engage in economic growth, when you actually have substantial growth, a lot of the spending increases as well. We've seen that pretty consistently. It's not like, growth, now the government can spend less. There's growth, so now the government's spending more on all its programs. I don't know. I'm not seeing how this bill, will help reduce the deficit or is a step in the right direction. I'm just not seeing it based on the information I have now. It just seems to be another instance of, the kind of going away from the problem. And I guess you can maybe kind of get away with it because most of it is tax cuts. And that seems like, well, you're saving the American people money. And so it's sort of reducing the government bloat. But at the same time, it's doing the exact opposite of addressing the deficit, right? So you kind of move in this opposite direction between tax cuts on one hand, which normally you think of as kind of associated with maybe trimming down the government and so forth. And then deficit on the other hand, which you also think of, we reduce the deficit, we're trimming the government, getting rid of bloat and bureaucracy. But here they're kind of going in opposite directions. It's the tax cuts that seem to be the biggest contributor to this bill's negative effect on the deficit. So I don't know, just this thoughts on that kind of slog of monologue that I just gave.
No, that was good. I personally don't think Donald Trump cares about the deficit. He might once in a while give it lip service, but when you think about it, when Biden was still in office, like in January, and the new inauguration hadn't yet occurred, Trump and his people were pushing for Biden to increase the debt ceiling by $5 trillion or something like that. Why would they do that? Well, they wanted it to happen on Biden's watch, so it would make Biden look bad and Trump wouldn't have to deal with it. But they knew back then where this was all headed, which was to massively increase the deficit. And I don't think they make any bones about it. So I don't know. I think Trump figures, he'll be gone. It'll be somebody else's problem. In the meantime, let the good times roll.
Yeah, what are your
Yeah,
thoughts on that,
you know what,
Connor?
I think that this was always going to happen no matter which administration was in power, whether it was a Democrat or Republican administration. I mean, this just follows suit really with previous administrations going back, many years. We always raise we always raise the debt ceiling. We always kick this can down the road. So I think it's really as simple as that. That this was always going to happen, unfortunately. And Musk is fighting it. He is rightly calling it out as this is just bad policy. It's bad politics. It's bad for America in the long run. But gee, it really feels like I don't even know what the solution is. Like it really feels like we're stuck between a serious rock and a hard place. I don't know how we get out of this. Nobody wants to cut. It feels like if we really want to shave, like you said, Sam, earlier, if we really want to shave into this deficit, we'd have to go serious fiscal austerity. We'd have to go that route and start cutting Social Security, which is a huge expenditure, or Medicaid, or how about this? How about cutting military spending? That's definitely by a country mile. The largest government expenditure. And these are all just quagmires that we don't have time to get into today, obviously. But there's each of anybody who's party to any one of those expenditures, whether it's the general public through Social Security, or the Lockheed Martin and other contractors affiliated with the military industrial complex. They all have good reason to push back on those. So I just don't see those things getting cut, unfortunately. I just kind of foresee, unfortunately, irresponsible spending. Just keep spending, keep gambling, hoping that one day we're going to hit the jackpot and we're going to make so much money, we're going to score so big that it's going to dig us out of this hole. And I just don't see America especially cutting spending on military spending. I think we're just so addicted to that. We're just so addicted to playing statecraft around the globe and shaping politics and governments around the globe. And yeah, it's a maybe that's a cynical view, but that's kind of my take on it.
Sam and Connor, this group of ours, our national conversation, we actually wrote a book. Give me 1 second, I'll be right back. And it's called Let's Fix America. And we dealt with a lot of these issues in 2021 or so. And we talked about the deficit and how to reduce it. And we talked about Social Security and how to save it. A lot of good research was done on that. And one of the things that we learned was that if you raise the retirement age by 2 years, I think right now it's 67. If you raised it to 69, you would build in solvency for like the next 50 years of Social Security. So why don't we do that? It just seems like the easy thing to do. Our population is aging. We live much longer now than we used to. Why not make people work another year or two? Well, I got a lot of blowback for that position from some liberals who were helping us at the time, saying, well, wait a minute. Our constituents have worked a long time and they've done hard physical labor on the assembly lines and other places like that. Maybe their back hurts and they don't want to work anymore. At 67, we should let them retire. I'm just the opposite. I'm 73 now and I haven't slowed down, and I like the idea of keeping busy. And I think a lot of older people feel the same way. Why not let us continue to work for a while longer and keep contributing to Social Security and help boost the solvency there?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I think, Jeff, it's like, as you mentioned, and as Connor was alluding to there, it's like you have to make these short-term sacrifices, or do something that maybe a certain lobbying group doesn't want, right? Or certain constituents don't want, if they've been on that assembly line for a long time, maybe they're in a fairly backbreaking profession that's, they really want that retirement money kind of earlier there. I don't know. I guess maybe to shift focus just a little more broadly here. Um, I've always heard lots of talk on the deficit and kind of how big of a deal it is to try to reduce the deficit as best we can. And I'm not disagreeing with that. I think that's absolutely true. But for a very long time, I had a tough time kind of visualizing, okay, why exactly do we want to reduce the deficit? What's the actual tangible impact of not addressing this problem, and grappling with the consequences years later? Like why right now should we go through all the effort to kind of go against the lobbying groups, go against the short-term interest, cut the spending, raise the taxes, do what basically no one wants to do in the short term to then address this deficit problem. Now, Jeff, a little while earlier, you mentioned Greece, which I think is a good example there. I'm just wondering if either of you can maybe describe kind of your awareness of like, okay, well, what could actually happen if we don't address the deficit? If we keep kicking this can down the road, we keep spending to get ourselves out of debt, we go into more debt to get out of debt, and it's just kind of this self-perpetuating cycle. And kind of what actually happens? Because I think for a lot of people, maybe it's difficult to visualize, and so you just go automatically to kind of the short-term interest, and you don't worry about the deficit as much.
Well, one big reason to get serious about the deficit now rather than later is that as the deficit increases and the debt load increases, we have to pay more interest rate on that. And the percentage of the budget now that goes to interest is growing year after year. And at some point, so much money is going to have to go to pay the interest on the debt that there will be very little money left over for other legitimate programs, even the military. So we're putting a squeeze on ourselves. We might not feel it totally today, but we will at the rate we're going.
Yeah. And Connor, if I could also ask you a question there, because you kind of, you gave what as you said could be described as somewhat of a cynical view. I'm just curious, like, are you kind of in this state of mind right now where you're just kind of resigned and like, you know what, this is just the way America is, and at some point we're just going to have to suffer through whatever the massive deficit causes? Or do you feel like there's some route we can go to a solution here? It's just really hard, but we got to fight for it. Like, I don't know, is kind of the cynicism impeding the ability to engage in action to address this problem? Just where's your headspace at there? I just kind of want to dig into that more. I'm curious.
I'm not trying to sound too alarmist here, but if there's one thing we're really good at, the best thing that we're good at, for better or for worse, is war. And some people will say that these are righteous wars, that we're exporting democracy around the globe, and we're fighting on behalf of human rights in places like Iraq and Syria and all the Middle East and all these other places. But my main concern here, and this is there are a lot of other conservatives who will speak on this and who unfortunately subscribe to this point of view. And I think that I don't see the U.S. implementing fiscal austerity measures anytime soon. Like I said, it's not in our character. I don't see the American government issuing tax hikes, especially at a time where inflation has just absolutely gutted the middle class. We're an endangered species. I just simply don't think that's politically palatable for any administration, whether it's the Trump administration or some future liberal Democrat administration. And so, I think that, well, first of all, there was an isolationist streak for sure. I'd say it may be possibly one of the defining characteristics of Trump's platform. And a lot of people were on board with that because they were tired of the forever wars. They were tired of all this global entanglement that was draining America's resources. But, history shows us that when empires are in decline, they tend to try to expand as a way of acquiring resources to service their obligations, which are bearing down on them in a crushing way. And, I'm a student of history. I love history more than anything. And so I think that this could be a part of America's future. Well, we'll see what happens. Again, I don't want to be cynical, but, with the way things are going right now, especially in the Middle East, I wake up every day and I check to make sure we're not at war with Iran, because I think Israel is it's only not a question of if, but when are they going to drag us into their war with Iran and reshaping the Middle East. And I think that America could go on a kind of a last ditch excursion here around the globe and say, okay, it's become politically infeasible to fix this at home without like a French Revolution style scenario uprising among the populace. So that kind of leaves us with what we're good at. We have all these military assets. We're a declining power, still the most powerful military in the world, but that's changing. China is rising. So now is our time to kind of go out and give this global statecraft one more try and see if we can topple Iran and plunder their resources, and that'll aid our cause and take some relief off of our debt burden and perhaps other wars. Once our enemies are defeated, we plunder them. That's kind of how we do things. So I don't know. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but I mean, history shows that great powers tend to do this actually, rather than engage in isolationism and self-reflection and kind of hermetism. If they have the resources, the military resources, they tend to go out and grab power or resources one last time.
Sam, we should wrap this up, but let's go back to Elon Musk and DOGE and Trump and where all this started. One of the frightening things about the social media wars that these guys have been engaging in the last couple of days is, Musk is saying basically, I've got dirt on you, Mr. President. I'm going to reveal it. I'm going to withdraw my Starlink and my SpaceX from the equation, so you can't have access to that, which the U.S. military is highly dependent on right now. Trump is saying, well, we're going to cancel all of your military and government contracts, which is going to screw you, Trump. I mean, Musk, if all this happens, it's not good for our national security. It's really not. I mean, these guys are playing with fire here, and I hope that cooler heads prevail in coming weeks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When kind of a lack of professionalism actually has real ramifications for the security of our country, for the welfare of people, there's a humorous side of this, but as we've seen in this conversation, there's also something to be taken pretty seriously here. I think that one thing that I kind of want to end off on, just as we wrap up here, there's a lot to be concerned about. There's a lot to be kind of frightened of in our current circumstance, and I think, as Connor made clear, there's a fair bit to be cynical about, as to what's actually going to happen in the U.S., whether certain things are feasible or not. But I think at the end of the day, we have the fortunate circumstance of still, living in a democracy. And, really it's up to us, just as regular people kind of acting as a collective, to try to make change. That sounds a little cliche, but I think at the end of the day, that's something that we just kind of have to take upon ourselves to do, right? To really try to find solutions, to engage in dialogue that's meaningful, and to try to fight against, our maybe inclination to just resign ourselves to apathy, right? And say, what, everything's screwed. It's, we're not going to make a difference at all. So let's just sit back and sort of enjoy the fireworks. I think even if at the end of the day, some of these issues can't be solved, or at least can't be solved in the near term, I think we still got to try. We still got to try to address these things, and we just got to try to really promote reasonable solutions to a lot of these issues, wherever possible. And if it doesn't happen, then, well, at least we can say that we tried. Yeah.
I totally agree. That's what national conversation is all about. We are trying. It's an uphill battle, but we can't give up the fight.
The right to change and to lobby for that is a political privilege that we have here in the United States, and we should certainly make use of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, okay. Well, yeah, as Jeff said, we're kind of running out of time here. So thank you again, both of you, for joining, sharing your perspectives on this. So we kind of dug into some of these issues. Obviously we can dig into these things for hours and hours, but we're kind of limited and constrained in what we can get into. So maybe we'll have you guys for a future podcast episode. But until then, have a great rest of your day. We'll see you later. And as for whoever's watching this, if you enjoy this sort of content, just candid conversations, trying to understand alternative perspectives, please feel free to subscribe, like, or otherwise follow the content on whatever platform or medium you're watching this. And do comment if that's an option on the platform you're looking at. We really want to hear a wide variety of opinions on these subjects, and also just on the podcast itself, anything we can improve. So yeah, thank you again, and we'll see you guys next time.
This podcast was brought to you by Our National Conversation, a place where students generate policy solutions to the biggest problems facing America. Join us in freeing political dialogue from hyperpartisanship. To learn more about what you heard today, check us out at ournationalconversation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Our National Conversation to show your support and keep up with our latest efforts.